So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Toni Schoenenberger. I'm the Executive Chairman of STARS. STARS is a global platform for dialogue to discuss developments which will impact the society as a whole, but also particularly our businesses, our companies in the next couple of years. No doubt, geopolitical intelligence is a must for any business leader. So today, we are continuing the webinar series on India. India is a rising power, no doubt, possibly the third largest economy before 2013. But will India's complexity and internal divisions slow it down, as was the case in the past? Question mark. We want to deepen our understanding of India. Today, we have the great privilege to talk to Heribert Dieter. Heribert, welcome. Good to have you on this webinar.
Yeah, good morning, Toni.
Heribert Dieter is a senior fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. He's a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, India. And his focus is geopolitics and geoeconomics and foreign trade policy. Thank you very much again, Heribert, and we are very much looking forward to your insights. We have now approximately 30 minutes time to discuss with Heribert Dieter. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature below to type in your question, and I would like to encourage you to do it as quickly as possible. So, Heribert, let's start with a couple of questions. India has a huge potential, looking at the Indian economy, obviously. I just mentioned possibly the largest population, a size of the market, huge pool of talents in the IT area, etc. And as I said before, India could become the third largest economy very soon. The question obviously is, what are the domestic challenges for India right now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Toni, and thank you very much for the invitation. I very much enjoy talking about both India and China in these days, because we should, of course, keep them or analyze them in tandem. And India, you asked about the challenges. Let me first mention what speaks in favor of India. What are the positive developments in India? And the first and foremost is demographics. India is the world's most populous country, will continue to be the world's most populous country until the end of the forecasting period of the United Nations, which is 2100. India's population is currently a bit over 1,400 million. It will rise a little more, but not much more, and it will be around 1,400 million at the end of this century. In China's population will shrink. We all know that it's currently already shrinking. And according to the UN forecast published in June, China's population will go down to 640 million by the end of this century. That's the medium scenario. They have other scenarios, but this is the most likely scenario. So just consider, by the end of this century, China's population will be merely 40% of India's population. So that's one factor we have to consider. It is a rising power with the world's largest population, and that is a very significant factor. India has also been expanding massively in the creation of new infrastructure. One example is aviation. India had 70 airports in 2014 when Modi started. They now have 142. And speaking from Berlin, as I do, this is of course something quite remarkable. They not only get projects started, they get them completed. in relatively within the schedule. So infrastructure is amazingly quickly developed, and not just in airports. India is investing in so-called dedicated freight corridors, which are freight corridors for trains, double-decker container trains, from the center to the both east and west coast. Roads are built, and I travel to India since 2006 regularly, and I personally notice that infrastructure is improved dramatically. We should consider this infrastructure investment as a major feature for future development, because that was one of the bottlenecks in the past. India's airports, India's ports were not as nearly as well developed as the Chinese competitors' infrastructure was developed. And let me just have a final look at aviation. The largest Indian airline, Indigo, has placed an order for over 1,300 aircraft with Airbus. 1,300 planes have been ordered by Indigo. Air India recently reprivatized, currently has 150 planes. They have ordered 470. The estimations are that air traffic in India in the next, by 2042, will increase fivefold. So there are quite a few indicators that are very positive. I would like to add also that Apple is moving to India. Apple has been moving to India. Apple previously was kind of in a symbiotic economic relationship with the People's Republic of China. Today, some iPhones are made in India, probably a quarter by 2027. So it is there is a start, but of course there is room for improvement. What we shouldn't ignore is there are big issues in Indian education. India's schools are not very good. They need to improve on that. But at the same time, they have excellent technical universities. And that is part of the irritating picture. Bad schools, fantastic technical universities, and I think this is a symbol for the whole of India. You have both at the same time. You have a bad education, you have excellent education, and it will be interesting to follow where India is going in the next decades.
There is now a coalition government. What are the consequences for Modi, and what about the question, what after Modi?
Well, I can't answer the question, what after Modi? This is probably he doesn't know himself either. How long he intends to stay in power? He's now in his third term. He has run the country for 10 years. He has achieved quite a few things. I would like to mention that when he began governing the country in 2014, red tape was all over the place. The World Bank's ease of doing business index ranked India at number 142. They moved up 80 notches under Modi to number 62, close to Italy and Mexico. We don't know how Modi will run a coalition government. This is new to him. He didn't have to consult anybody. And he made some rather erratic decisions in the past. For instance, this so-called demonetization, when banknotes were declared illegal or were no longer legal tender in 2016. Some observers have expressed the expectation that it will be good for Modi, that he has to consider people and consult coalition partners before he makes decisions. The leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, said at the beginning of September that Modi, and I quote, is psychologically finished, that Modi has lost his confidence. It's a bit early to tell. Initially, after the election, Modi seemed to be quite confident. nominated the same ministers in his cabinet, with the addition of the coalition partners ministers, of course. I don't think that the picture of Gandhi is completely accurate, but certainly he will have to change his style of governance and government in the future. But one point is quite obvious. Modi 3.0, as it has been labeled, is continuing with investment in infrastructure and is basically following the rather successful economic policies of the past. So I don't expect anything dramatic in economic policy to happen within the next 5 years.
Before you mentioned Apple investing in India, but on the other hand, we see many foreign investors finding India a difficult place to do business and, for instance, go to Vietnam. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
India is a difficult place to do business and continues to be a difficult place to do business. And we should look at India's history to understand that India has been colonized for hundreds of years. They're independent since less than 80 years. And the colonial phase continues to affect economic policy making in India today. Even within the BHP, there is a strong anti-Western component that doesn't like foreign direct investment. They want to have as native an economic development, if you want to call it like that, as possible. So the economic policies of the Brits, of the colonial power in the 19th and 20th century until 1947, are still in the back of the minds of many policymakers in India. They see liberalization as a succession of the colonial policies of the past. That is difficult. Modi himself and his economic advisors are aware of the need to liberalize not just the domestic economy, but also its trade relations. But they are moving in slow steps, and they are trying to open the economy, but they don't want to do that overnight. There's a very gradual approach. They are in the process of implementing trade agreements, for instance, with the EFTA countries, including, of course, Switzerland. They have a free trade agreement with Australia. Apparently, the free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India is about to be concluded, which would be a big step forward for the liberalization of India's trade policy. So there are movements. But India is taking not a big bang approach, not a we will abandon our economic policies of the past overnight, but the direction is correct. At the same time, we should, of course, not ignore the complexities of the domestic political sphere. The BJP had a revision and a streamlining of labor laws ready, but that needs to be implemented by the states. And there is opposition against the implementation of those liberalized labor laws. The bottom line is, India will never become Singapore. It will never be a place to do easy business. But at the same time, from a microeconomic perspective, this is one of the largest markets of the coming decades. You have a lot of young people which are optimistic and consumption hungry. And I don't have to speak about the mood in Western Europe, including Germany, when it comes to that dimension of life. Consumption is almost a four-letter word in this part of the world. It's not in India. Just consider Indian weddings, but I leave it at that. It's a consumption-hungry society that is optimistic, and I'm quite confident that it will be useful to be in that market and to produce in that market for that market. Whether India will become integrated into global supply chains is, of course, another matter.
You mentioned China before, and before turning to India's foreign policy, I would just like to ask another question regarding China. In a recent article in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, the leading Swiss paper, you wrote that China's great power ambitions are pretty fragile, so to say, because of the demographic developments. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and also on the China-India relationship?
On the first, the one-child policy of the Chinese government was a big mistake. The one-child policy, just to remember that, was based on forecasts of two economists in the late 70s, early 80s that suggested that if nothing is done, the population of China will rise to 4,800 million. 4,800 million was the forecast. So the Chinese government implemented this one-child policy, and it was successful in the sense that birth rates came down, but they came down too far. In the process, the old, century-old, thousands of years old social fabric of Chinese society was destroyed. The family is no longer what it used to be. We have numerous people that are on their own. They have no siblings, they have no cousins, and they have to take care of 2 parents and 4 grandparents. Just consider that. Send those soldiers into a war. Difficult. They will, if the projections of the United Nations, which I mentioned at the beginning, are correct, then China will be facing a dramatic decline in their population, and in history, a rising power usually had rising population, not a shrinking population. I'm not aware of any case where there has been a geopolitical competitor with a shrinking population. So that is a big issue, and the Chinese government is now aware of the fact, and they have given up on restrictions. You can have 3 children now, but a Chinese colleague said they could have an 8-child policy today. There are simply not the conditions for having a larger family, and as I said, the family links have been, if not destroyed, then weakened. The relationship between India and China is the second part of your, or the second question, and which it's a very difficult relationship. It goes back, of course, to the attack by Mao's China on India in 1962, and Indian Prime Minister Nehru was totally shocked by this unexpected attack. Some people say he also suffered physically and psychologically and died 2 years later. India continues to remember the war of 1962, remembers Chinese aggression, and just as an important footnote, Indian society also remembers that the only country that helped them in those critical moments in 1962 was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union provided immediate support, and that continues to be a factor of Indian foreign policy to this very day. India and China are competitors. At the same time, they do cooperate in some fora, for instance, in the BRICS group. I sometimes think that India is in that group in order to make sure that China is not completely dominating that group. And I think that over time there might be, and this is an important question for the West, there might be a kind of a cooperation between those 2 countries developing, which would be very interesting and dangerous for the West. Just not tomorrow, not in 5 years, but say in 2050. China may have given up on communism. China will then have 350 million people less than India. And India could very well become the senior partner in a bilateral relationship, which would be a relationship that is very attractive the global south, so-called global south. And in the West, we should keep that in mind. This current competition between India and China doesn't have to last forever. It will in the short term, but in the long term, they may well find a way to cooperate rather than to confront each other. So for the West, this is a challenge, and we should keep that in mind.
You mentioned the global south. This is an interesting question. I mean, what or could you explore a little bit on that, on the significance of the global south in the next 10 or 20 years? And what about India's role in this kind of emerging world?
India portrays itself as a neutral player, and they do that with quite a bit of success. I was in Delhi in March 23. That was a big conference, and the co-organizer was the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they had invited Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov to speak in their biggest hall. And quite a few correspondents from European countries said this would not be possible in Western Europe. It gives you an idea that India takes the liberty to speak to everybody. They speak with the Russians. Modi's first trip after being re-elected was to Moscow. They speak, of course, a lot to the Americans. They cooperate also in technical cooperation on military matters these days with the United States. But India has this leadership ambition, and again we go back to Nehru. Nehru was an important member of the Bandung Conference in '55. The non-aligned movement has had its origin in the Bandung Conference, and India sponsored that. And to this very day, the tradition of being a spokesperson or a spokes country for the global south is very attractive to Indian policymakers. Modi himself suggests that India could be a teacher to the world. The term is Vishwa Guru. And there are quite a few similarities between that approach of Modi and the US approach of being a shining city on the hill, leading the world into a better world. So India's foreign policy is currently characterized by this non-alignment, talking to everybody, not becoming an ally, and this I must underline. India will never become an ally of the United States in the term that they will form a close military alliance. They will cooperate where it suits them, but they will walk away where it doesn't suit them. And that is, of course, for many countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, this is quite an attractive proposition. In the current geopolitical conflicts, policymakers in those continents are confronted with the need to position themselves. The West wants to position many countries in their camp, but again, I repeat, we should be cautious because we run out of friends, we run out of supporters. There is, if you look at the sanctions regime that the West is implementing against Russia, there are not many countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa that support us. And one of them that is not supporting us is India. India is continuing or even expanding its economic relationship with the Russian Federation, and they do that sometimes with tongue-in-cheek. Foreign Minister Jaishankar said several times that the West should be grateful to India for buying Russian oil, because if India wouldn't have bought the Russian oil, this would have driven oil prices further up, and inflation in all over the world would have risen further. So Jaishankar, who's a very sharp guy and who's a very self-confident guy, said the West should be grateful rather than criticize us for not participating in the sanctions regime.
You mentioned the US. What are you expecting from the US elections, and what does it mean regarding the strategic partnership with the US?
Well, whether Harris or Trump wins will not make a big difference in the bilateral relationship. On Capitol Hill, there is one enemy, and that is China, and India is very helpful in combating that enemy number one of the United States of America. So neither Harris nor Trump will weaken the relationship between India and the United States. Of course, it would be remarkable if a woman with Indian heritage would become the first female president of the United States of America. That, by the way, underlines the importance of the Indian diaspora, which is very strong in the United States. The median household income of people of Indian origin in the United States is $150,000. That's twice the US average. There are a lot of influential people in the United States with Indian origin, and that, of course, helps to deepen the economic ties between the US and India. So no matter who wins that very tight election in November, the relationship between the US and India will deepen. What the US is lacking, and what we are also lacking in the European Union, is an economic strategy to deal with India. Trump cancelled the preferential treatment of imports from India in 2019 because he said India is too protectionist, which is probably true. But neither Biden nor Harris nor Trump seem to have an idea how to develop a geo-economic policy, and they leave India on its own. The European Union is, as Jay Shankar, the foreign minister, complains time and again, not interested in a trade agreement. But the European Union wants a very complicated agreement that deals with everything under the sun, from the protection of the climate to the welfare to the protection of forests, and that there will not be an agreement between the European Union and India if it's such a complicated agreement. So yeah, this is my expectation on the relationship between Europe and India, as well as on India and the US.
Turning to South Asia, we see quite a lot of instabilities, looking at Pakistan, now looking at, obviously, at Bangladesh. What is India's approach to these neighbors and to South Asia in general?
Well, India is in one of the most complicated neighborhoods on the planet. There is no stabilizing country in the neighborhood. The only stable country is India itself. They have this nuclear-armed former part of India, which is Pakistan. They now have issues in Bangladesh, but I don't think that Bangladesh will be a basket case for a long period of time. Bangladesh was developing well in recent years. India is not playing the big boy in town game in its neighborhood. It is rather benign in its approach to the neighboring countries. It cannot expect many benefits from the relationship within the neighborhood. It has to look beyond its immediate neighborhood, simply because, as you pointed out, there is a bit of, or more than a bit of trouble in the region. So India has to be looking beyond South Asia, and that's what they are currently doing. At the same time, I would classify or qualify their engagement in the region as rather constructive, helping but not interfering when unwanted.
There is a question from Reto Aman, and I read it to you. As an entrepreneur, I often hear that it is extremely difficult to do business with India, and that many people give it a miss because it is difficult to gain a foothold. Very complicated, very long procedures, and uncertainties depending on the region. What are your experiences, especially for smaller or medium-sized companies?
Well, again, you have examples for both kind of positions. I know companies, quite a few, that are have been in India for a long period of time, continue to expand their operations in India, have given domestic management to Indians rather than to expats from Germany. At the same time, even large companies like Ford have closed shop in India and found it too complicated. So it apparently depends on in which part of India you want to do business. As a general rule, it is easier in the south. It is significantly more difficult in the poorer parts of India in the north. And yeah, so it's difficult for me to give a generalizing picture. It is certainly not a country, and I repeat myself, that is similar to Singapore, where doing business is easy. But it is a goal of the Modi government, and has been a goal of the Modi government, despite some internal opposition, to be more business friendly, to have more foreign direct investment. And I mean, one example, of course, Apple is not a small company, but Modi has been very active in promoting the investment of Apple in and the production facilities that Apple, or Foxconn rather, has been creating in India. He has Modi himself displayed a golden iPhone whenever he's in public using a phone. And don't forget that for the time being, there are 2 Apple shops in the whole of India. So there is a lot of room for expansion also of the activities of large companies like Apple.
Final question, Heribert. In 2047, India will be 100 years old. How do you see India then in 2047?
Well, on the current trajectory, I expect that India will be self-confident, significantly richer than today, probably the world's, well, should I say second largest economy? I'm a little bit reluctant to say that, but given the difficulties in China, we could see that India will at some stage even overtake China, which is currently a bit unlikely, because on a per capita basis, India is significantly poor. It's 20% of the per capita income of China today. But India continues to have a story. India has, as I mentioned, the ambition, the optimism, the manpower. When they fly to the moon, they have excellent software developers. The knowledge-based economy will require India. So I'm optimistic that India will achieve what it wants to achieve, which is to return. I mean, this, you have to take the Indian narrative. The return to superpower status. They have been there before. India has been an organized society when in Europe not much was organized thousands of years ago. So India's ambition is to return to a leading position in the global economy and also in international relations. And I think they can achieve that within the next roughly 25 years.
Thank you very much, Heribert. Time is up, unfortunately. I want to thank you very much for your brilliant insights. I think we all learned a lot about India, about geopolitics, and about the challenging developments for business. So thank you very much again. I wish you all the best, Heribert, and I very much look forward to having you again at STARS events. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Toni. It was a pleasure.
The next webinar will be on 15th of November with Professor Jivanta Shetty. She is the director at the Ireland India Institute at Dublin City University. I hope to see you then. Goodbye until soon. Thank you.